hearing you scream like this.
I don't give a fuck, Brian. You're gonna have my ass after you two now. I'm not playing with your dumb ass no more. My business today is making sure I get a lawyer ASAP.
To put me away, like you say?
Brian, somebody needs to put you in check. You need is to be in check, and the court system is the perfect thing to do it.
My name is Brian James Shanley. I am a local Christian minister out of Minneapolis, Minnesota here. And my daughter is Gabrielle Shanley. This is her album, Monster. You are listening to disc number 2. Gabrielle initially asked me to make a cameo, sort of an appearance on her album, and to say a few things to the listeners. So I thought I would just say a few words on this second disc. This is a project that I always prayed would never become necessary. Matter of fact, there were many times when I just wanted to move on with life. It was my daughter Gabrielle who was energized and who was motivated and who said, "Daddy, no. I know you feel in your heart like giving up, but this story needs to be told, Daddy." Number one, because the lives of my brother and my sister are on the line. But number two, because this is happening to some other man right now, and someone needs to tell the story, and someone needs to make a stand so that change can be made. If you live in Minnesota, or if you live in America, but you're just a concerned tax-paying citizen who enjoys having actual justice in our court system, and who hopefully wants fair play as much as possible for all people, then my story is very unique. Disc number 1 provided the evidence of the story that I'm telling you. This story that I'm telling you, it's like love and marriage, can't have one without the other, the song from Married with Children, the TV show. You could have the other disc, but it would just be a bunch of clips. Kathy's greatest hits, if you will. Disc number 2 is going to tell you the story that puts those clips into context. So you could hear just the clips without the story, or you could hear just the story without the clips. But hearing this disc without the evidence would just be like hearing a magnificent story that you might believe would never take place. See, whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not, you're not going to believe what your tax dollars are paying public sector union employees to do to me and to my 3 children in Minnesota, in Anoka County. I'm going to tell you the story. You're going to hear the evidence if you haven't already heard disc 1. And I want what's happening to shock you. I want it to upset you. And I want it to call you to action. I want you to feel led to speak out. I want you to feel led to get involved. Why am I reaching out to you guys? Because I've already stood in front of the heathen court system, in the divorce industry, the cash cow. And it is designed for itself. They use the phrase, "We just care about the best interest of the children." That's a lie straight out of hell. The court system has so let me down that you, the community, the taxpayer, my neighbor, my fellow citizen, you're all that me and my children have left. I'm going to lay a couple of words on you that you hear on television all the time. Domestic assault, spousal abuse. Now, depending on how your mind has been conditioned, when you hear these modern, yuppie, cultural buzzwords, what images rush to your mind? Odds are very good that if you're in the majority, you think of a man hurting his wife. Am I right about it? I mean, in our time, that's the stereotype that the mainstream media, the public schools, the secular universities, and the government have drilled into our heads. But I'm going to ask you to think outside of the box that these prejudices have created and ask yourself some hypothetical questions. What if the reverse of this stereotype was actually taking place right in your community? What if the wife assaulted the husband? What if the woman abused the children? What if the woman was mentally and emotionally sick, manipulative, controlling, and tyrannical? What if the woman sent the man and a child to the hospital on a routine basis? Would you have the courage to look beyond your prejudices and your presuppositions and your preconceived ideas that have been programmed into your mind by the culture and actually see the evidence? Or has our culture and our media and our school system so thoroughly done your thinking for you to the point that your mind is made up a priori, which is Latin for prior to and apart from any examination of the evidence? What if the violent wife lied about her behavior all over your community? What if she denied her violence and her anger problems? What if she lied and changed the story and actually said that her victim was the perpetrator? What if she began to say that she was the victim herself? Would you join her in her calculated effort to further victimize her victims? Or would you have the intelligence to see through her lies? Would you have the discernment to really know what's going on? What if she fooled counselors? What if the local so-called church was suckered by her external charms, by her smile, and by her willingness to do volunteer work? What if the government agencies who are financed by your taxes in the divorce industry took her side? What if the so-called police department laughed in the male victim's face when he tried to tell them the truth? What if the guardian ad litem group, the so-called Child Protective Services Agency, and the courts all backed the female aggressor despite the evidence and the rules of law, based solely on the fact that she's a female? What if they added more lies to her story in order to more professionally help her out because of the fact that her male victim is a Christian and a visible and outspoken minister in the community? What if the female abuser had been furnished with your tax dollars the right to lie on affidavits and police reports, to haul her male victim into court or into the so-called Child Protective Services Department's office on a routine, on a repetitive, on a habitual basis, without restraint, without consequence, without warning, and without correction? What if the Child Protective Services Department abused the system of which they're simply the employees and forced her to lie and forced her to file false charges against him, knowing full well that they would never stick, but just hoping for a miraculous back door to try to make him go to certain classes to be re-educated so that his parenting would conform to their prejudices? And what if she was motivated to do this by threats of losing the rights to her kids if she did not cooperate with these agencies? What if fighting and defeating false charge after false charge, not just small charges now, the magnitude and the horror of the accusations being criminally slanderous and libelous? What if this kind of a fight took an emotional and a financial toll on the male victim? And what if she was never made by anybody to account for her behavior of continuously making false accusations? What if the opposite took place and she was rewarded by the so-called court system for this action? Well, I got to tell you an ugly truth, brothers and sisters. This type of injustice, this type of bigotry, this type of child endangerment, and this type of malpractice is happening right now in your community. If you live in Minnesota, it's happening in your backyard. It's being forcibly financed by you via your tax dollars. And this story, let's just say, for example, it might be true. Well, how does that make you feel? If you haven't already heard Disc 1, it should be enclosed with this second disc. Disc 1 is the evidence, and it's evidence that they all hope never sees the light of day. It's evidence that I quite honestly prayed I would never have to release. And I didn't want to do it. My daughter had to do it because I didn't feel like it. If you listen to it, you're going to hear firsthand, real-life, actual footage of the day-to-day life that it was living with Catherine Bogus. This is a woman to whom Anoka County, Minnesota courts in the United States of America gave temporary custody of 2 minor children. Please listen to it, and it's going to rock your world that this woman has custody not only of my kids, but her own 2 pre-existent kids, Kaylin and Casey Joe. After you hear it, I want you to consider, and I want you to pray on what kind of action that you feel led to take. There's a pending court case that is raging on right now as we speak about this very issue because of anti-male bigotry and gender bias, because of anti-Christian religious discrimination. The kids are the ones that are actually losing in this court battle. These various agencies, the family courts, child protection, etc., these people need to be sent a message that someone more powerful than they are is looking over their shoulders, and they're demanding quality work in exchange for being funded by the taxpayers' money. If this doesn't happen, they're going to continue getting away with this crooked behavior. Your hard-earned tax dollars pay their salaries. So I want you to please, for the safety and the future of my 2 precious young babies, Jamie and Kal-El, I'm asking you to get involved. The secular court system has not given my family justice in the American or constitutional sense of the word. And so now I've been put in that position where I have no other alternative but to appeal to a different court, and that is the court of public opinion. You see, you guys are the citizens. If you speak loudly enough to them, they're going to have no other alternative but to listen. If, when you listen to this, you're in another part of Minnesota, you're in another part of the United States, I want you to ask around. Don't take my word for a darn thing. Do your own research. Find a lawyer from up here, or who has the right to function up here. Get him in an honest moment off the record. What you're going to learn is that amongst the bar, amongst lawyers, amongst people who are in the know in this particular industry, unless they're an absolute liar or they've got an agenda, you're going to find out that in terms of the rumor mill, in terms of reputation, Anoka County, Minnesota, United States of America, is so well known among lawyers and among practicing professionals for its disregard of the law and for doing its own subjective thing that many lawyers who are licensed to practice in Minnesota refuse to set foot in Anoka County. They will not deal there. They will not practice there. It's clearly out of step with mainstreamism in terms of the practice of law. This situation, while it's ugly from where I sit, it's also unique in that it furnishes us with an opportunity to send a message to them that we will not tolerate this taking place. We will not pay for this anymore. And that things need to change in Anoka County immediately. The first CD in this, hopefully you've heard it, it speaks for itself. Now you might say, oh, it's difficult to listen to. Yeah, but just imagine if it was hard to listen to, how hard it was for the male victim and for the minor children involved, not just to listen to it, but to actually live through it. The male victim has gone broke fighting this, but he sees his babies as worth continuing on to the finish line for. I want you to pray about helping him and his children either financially to finance this fight or in other ways. I want you to listen to that first CD. I've already listened to it. Listen to it again. There's a lot at stake in this matter. The world has a saying. It says, pick your fights. I'm calling upon you to consider picking this one. If you would like to help financially, but you cannot afford to participate by way of money, I want you to please consider participating in other ways. Make calls to your family. Make calls to your friends. Call your neighbors. Call your schoolmates. Call your coworkers. Call your church members. Call everyone in your community. Tell this story. Burn these CDs. Get this out there. Call the local radio station. Talk radio. You got conservative politic radio. You've got religious talk radio. I want you to consider calling the media. Call the Attorney General. Call Congress. Call the Senate. Call human rights organizations. Call churches. Call community activists. Call constitutional watchdog organizations. Whoever comes to your mind that would be able to call these people to account immediately and demand fair play in the courts that you pay for. These people work for you. Like I said before, your taxes pay their salaries. They're your employees. If you screwed up this severely at your job, would you even have the job anymore? Don't tolerate this taking place in your own backyard. Don't tolerate it being done to one of your own neighbors. Don't tolerate being forced to pay for it. This man who you're listening to and my kids, we're in the fight of our lives. And once you hear that first CD, and once you understand in your heart the urgency of the situation, as well as the injustice that's taking place right here in your state, Minnesota, we pray that you feel in your heart that not only is this my fight, but now it's your fight too. Myself and my daughter Gabrielle would like to express at this point our gratitude to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy life to listen to this plea, and we're grateful in advance for any consideration that you give to the contents of what's recorded here. This recording is difficult to make in that I had always prayed that it would never become necessary, even going back many years. It's one of those things where it's like, you know what, I know that at some point it's going to come to a head, but I hope for some reason against the odds that it doesn't ever have to happen. Even as I sit here flapping my lips into the recorder right now, it is difficult to believe that the occasion has actually arisen, which makes its laying down necessary. It's kind of like having life insurance. You know, you hope to God that you're never finding yourself in a position in which it becomes necessary to call it in, to cash it in. But you still know at some point the day will come, you know what I mean? Even though it's going to be ugly. And I've often wondered, you know, if this day is actually going to come, and if so, what's it going to look like? What's it going to sound like? What's it going to feel like? That it has actually arrived is both like a dream and a nightmare at the same time. I'd like to note for the historical record that I gave my all in the attempt to prevent it and to resolve matters without allowing the crap to come out of the horse, without allowing the genie to come out of the bottle, if you know what I mean. I've never wanted to cause any unnecessary embarrassment to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Catherine Jo Bogus, or Shanley, whatever she calls herself. A person whom I still genuinely love in a sense of the word, still pray for her, still hope that she finds happiness and success and salvation in this life and the next. And I do this despite the dirt, all the things she's done to me, done to my kids, even done to her own kids. But tragically, the situation we find ourselves in is that events have unfolded, which have demanded that the facts be released to the public. Lies, gossip, hearsay, slander, false rumors, these things all demand that the record be corrected with truth. I wish there was another way, but there isn't. So help me God. I'm recording this and sending it out to my friends, my family, my former schoolmates, my co-workers, my fellow church members, Christian saints of other churches and denominations, basically the whole community. This is going out to people who personally know me, people who have only been loose acquaintances or business partners with me, people who only know me by reputation as a name that's out there on the street, or people who would never have heard of me unless this happened and came across their path. This is also going to ultimately be sent to the local and the national media, both mainstream and alternative, because those two different kinds of media will handle this in different ways. Some of the politicians on the Minnesota state level, some on the national level. It's already being sent to some of the personalities in the talk show industry. I want people to start talking about it. Going to send it to some churches. I've even received proactive phone calls prior to the second disc being recorded from some ministries, from some organizations, even some websites and some blogs. I've got people volunteering to let us use their mailing lists in order to reach a new constituency with this story. And I'm going to have to call on some of my acquaintances who are very visible professional athletes, some of my old pals who have made it into the entertainment industry, whether it be Los Angeles or New York. Sending this to a few fathers' rights organizations, some lawyers' networks. I'm sending it off to the Office of the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, a few legal watchdog and constitution groups, and there's even a law professor, one so far, hopefully more to come, at a major legal university, who's going to consider whether or not studying my story and my children's story would make for a good project for their law students. I do pray both for their attention, their word of mouth, and maybe even their involvement if they can think of something that I can't here. I'm humbly and respectfully as I know how, asking you as well to forward it on to everybody that you know. I want you to view this as a story which must be told. So long as you don't sell these discs, my daughter Gabrielle is authorizing you to burn them and get them in the mail. There's two different results I want, a short-term result and a long-term result. In the short term, action must be taken immediately by the community in order to protect my children from an unjust system whose ultimate goal it is to rob them of their father. We must be prepared to stand up to crooked government agencies and crooked courts with fearlessness in order that we remain free in the correct sense of the word, and in order that these institutions be reminded of their boundaries and limits as set forth both by the United States Constitution and the laws of the individual states, in this particular instance Minnesota. But in the long term, others need to learn from my and my children's experiences so that the same does not happen to other fathers and other children. Or if the system attempts this again to someone else, I now want you to be so educated about the issue that you're able to recognize it instantly because you've already encountered it before in my and my children's story. And once you see it and you know that it's happened in the past, it's still happening in the present, and you know that it's wrong in your heart, I want you to feel a motivation to take corrective action when you see this loom on the horizon, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of liberty, and for the sake of justice. This is an open recording to all, and only God in His sovereignty knows with absolute certainty who's ultimately going to get it or how far it's going to circulate, because He and He alone is the ruler over all things, and He will literally control its ultimate impact on the culture. Why am I recording with so broad an intended audience in mind? Because sometimes people go through things that are larger than can be handled alone. Sometimes people go through crises. Now, there wasn't really like a house fire that destroyed my family's home and we're rebuilding, nor has anyone been diagnosed with terminal cancer and needing to raise money for medical expenses. This family emergency is different from the norm that you're going to see on the flyer hanging at the market. At least it's different from the norm that our society is willing to talk about. All of my adult life, I've been a single parent. I've been the single father of Gabrielle Elizabeth Shanley. In recent years, I became a father 2 additional times, to JoAnna Shanley and to Kal-El Walter Martin Shanley. All of my babies are extremely precious to me. They mean more to me than anything on this planet, more to me than my own life. I've always worked hard and sacrificed much in order to attempt to secure for them opportunities that I never had myself as a child. While I was married to Jamie and Kal-El's mother, Catherine Jo Bogus, despite trying to work with her through great patience and great long suffering at the expense of my and Gabrielle's own physical, mental, and emotional safety, Catherine's violent behavior ultimately created an environment in which myself and Gabrielle attempting to live there was no longer safe. We were forced into a position in which we had no other alternative but to flee for our lives as the violence was escalating without restraint, and there was a very real fear that it was heading in a direction that was going to culminate in something horrible. Most who were familiar with the facts at that time worried that Catherine was either going to kill or permanently injure somebody. It was that serious. I'm 5 foot 7 inches tall, and I weigh approximately 165 or 170 pounds. I'm neither big nor intimidating. Everybody who knows me personally is aware of the fact that while I have a smart mouth and while I have a quick wit at times, when it comes to actual physical violence, I have never in the past, do not in the present, nor will ever in the future, with the help of and if it be the will of God, put my hands on anybody who is a woman. I grew up in a house with a single mother and a sister, and the value system that was passed on to me was that of the highest respect for women. Later on in my life, I have found myself in the place in which a scattered woman here or there has slapped me, and I've simply walked away without a physical response every single time. This is the man that I've been all of my life. Ask anybody. Down through the years, I've dated and I've been in contact with an embarrassingly high number of women. Yet, if you got them all in a room, you wouldn't find even one who says that I hurt her. Well, there is one, but the one that's willing to lie to the courts, lie to the cops, lie to the community, and lie to the church in order to control and manipulate outcomes according to her own wicked desires. In this particular instance with Catherine Bogus or Catherine Shanley or whatever, I literally sat on my hands while she strangled me. Knives were pulled on me. One time a can of soup was thrown at the back of my head busted open, and I held in the palm of my hand a handful of my own blood. I was hit with chairs. I had to lie and work about where bruising and tender areas on my torso came from. I had to make excuses in order to protect Kathy from the consequences of her behavior. I kept her out of jail by lying to protect her. Yet through it all, Catherine was never harmed in response. I never defended myself physically, although I must admit I did restrain her hands once, when she came after my daughter Gabrielle, who was 9 years old at the time, with a curtain rod for the sin of coming out of her bedroom one afternoon asking for a glass of milk. Yes, that definitely merits hitting someone with a curtain rod, doesn't it? So my daily life was one in which being on the receiving end of violence was an expectation. It was just a normal part of life. Being physically harmed was pretty much the general rule. It was something I pretty much accepted. To this very day, if she walks into the same room that I'm in, my body involuntarily, as a conditioned response, begins to prepare itself to suffer physical trauma. My pulse and respiration increase. My stomach rumbles. My hands cannot stop shaking. Adrenaline rushes through my body. I begin to sweat. There's a sweeping physical sensation in every inch of me because of the fact that my body is literally preparing itself to take on physical damage. And this is at the very sight of her. Throughout my separation from Catherine, we've run into an out-of-control divorce industry. It is a cash cow with its own philosophy, its own culture. It's an anti-male culture, and it's a pro-female way of life in Minnesota courtrooms in which, prior to and apart from the examination of any kind of physical evidence, raw data, or brute facts, it's assumed from the outset that children belong with women. And this is without regard to what kind or what quality of woman that we're dealing with. The flip side of that coin is that it's assumed from the outset that men are garbage until they demonstrate otherwise. And even after they demonstrate otherwise, they're still treated with rudeness, evil, and disrespect, even by people whose salaries are paid with their tax dollars. Whether it be anti-male bigotry in the Fridley Police Department and Mayor's office, whether it be the Anoka County Child Protection Agency, the Anoka County Family Court System, it's well known that this is one of the toughest parts in this area of the country for a man to get a fair shake. In Minnesota, a woman could sell her toddler into prostitution and allow them to be raped at cost by grown men in order to finance her next drug fix. What consequences is that woman going to suffer? None. She'll be put on all manner of social programs. That baby will never go to the dad. It'll be in foster care with a relative of the mother. And once she jumps through certain hoops that have been set forth by angry young women in the Child Protective Services Department of our government, she literally has a shot at getting that child back again someday, over against the father, even if the father's a decent man. This is how backwards, how out of step, and how out of touch with reality and justice Minnesota is in the area of its family court system. Despite the fact that the evidence is on my side, I'm up against a monster, because evidence doesn't seem to matter. But in order for the evidence and the facts to have a forum in which they're allowed to be fairly heard in the public square, I have secured a legal professional who is trained in the law. I do have a background in theology, philosophy, comparative religion, and logic, and I have appeared in court as my own representative, and I have, with the help of God, defeated Anoka County Child Protective Services in their own building, in front of their own judges, even when they were willing to lie in order to attempt to control me and my children's lives. That aside, when it comes to the etiquette as well as knowing the details of how the industry itself functions, I'm not formally trained in the field of law. I do feel that it is in my children's best interest if our story is told by someone trained in how the system works, and that's why I have secured an attorney, which is at a great cost. I've went to the free lawyers. They turned me away because of the fact that I work. For them to get involved, the requirements set forth by the powers that be, they need a person to have darn near no income and be doing next to nothing in the attempt to improve their family's lot in life. This plain and simply is not me. The sliding fee lawyers, while also being excellent folks, they want thousands of dollars up front that I plain and simply don't have. So I did get a lawyer that I have to pay myself. Anoka County Family Court, it's so famous among lawyers for its lack of regard for proper interpretation of the law in the manner that the authors of the law intended for it to be understood, and for doing its own subjective thing by forcing interpretations onto the statutes that are plain and simply not there. In a plain, historical, grammatical, contextual, syntaxical reading of it, that there are many lawyers that I've met or I've talked to who literally refuse to practice there. They won't even set foot in the building. The minute that I say it's taking place in Anoka County, they're done. And the ones that will go in there, their price immediately goes up for the inconvenience and the buffoonery of what they're about to be made to tolerate. I'm working hard at an honest job. I'm underemployed when you consider my skill set, my experience, my talent, and the point I'm at in my career. But I am grateful to have even a minimal opportunity to labor for a better life for my kids. I'm raising a teenage daughter, and I've been Jamie and Kal-El's primary caregiver for the majority of their lives until very recent times, when we ran into a little bit of curious decision-making in the Anoka County court system, and the kids went with Catherine for a season. And while I'm on the subject, I'm calling all Christians to pray for their safety through and their deliverance from their time with Kathy. Now, during this stretch of time, as I called it, Catherine is predictably signing up for every social program and every handout that she can get her hands on. She's working with Child Protective Services, who are not her friends, but she is not intelligent enough to understand that. And they're working together to come up with a new false accusation against me darn near monthly. The nature of the accusations gets more intense, more severe, and more gross each time. The ultimate goal is ultimately going to be separating me from my children. Defending myself against them gets more and more expensive. To this day, nobody has ever corrected her behavior. She has the complete support of the government. Like the Roman Catholic Inquisition, like the Salem witch trials, she has the freedom to accuse me falsely over and over again of all manner of false evil with no evidence. She has the right to keep harassing me. There's no one in the system that we've met yet who values freedom, fair play, or justice. There's a clear agenda being run here, and it has nothing to do with looking out for my children. She's seeking to get money from me. Her end game has to do with child support. If this happens, of course, this would make her a professional boxer who beats people up and gets paid for it. But since the victim of her assault is the one that has to give her money, then it would be comparable to a government-endorsed and state-sponsored robbery. How do you like your tax dollars doing that? If a man beat a woman, later on, would that woman have to pay the man? No. This is definitely something going on here. She wants to return to her native Illinois, or she wants to go to Iowa or Indiana. And she thinks she's taken my kids. She's threatened it a million times. Listen to the first disc in this album. She's willing to do anything that it takes in order to have me so distracted and so hemmed up in the system that I'll be powerless to stop her. She's even, tragically, but I saw it coming, willing to train and to coach her children to lie to police, to lie to therapists, in order to create a picture of me that doesn't even exist. For any gullible sucker, for any prejudiced bigot who's willing to buy it. And there is a receptive audience to this if they have something they can achieve by messing with me and coming between me and my children. Of course it's slander, of course it's libel, and it's a dishonest character assassination attempt. Hopefully she's deeply ashamed of it in the depths of her conscience. Domestic violence is a horrible crime against God and against the family that He has instituted. It's wrong when any spouse hits the other. However, when the woman is the aggressor and the man is the victim, statistics seem to indicate that this is the single most underreported crime in our society. Why is that? Well, there's several reasons. I know firsthand about some of them. First of all, it's embarrassing for a male to admit that something or someone got the better of him in the first place. It's all the worse of a shot to the male ego to publicly admit that the one who beat you was a woman. It's a fact of biology that a woman does not have the same capacity for physical strength and power that a man does. A man literally has to admit that a physically weaker person is doing him physical harm. This makes him look weaker than the average man. I've had friends shake their heads at me in disappointment and say, "Man, if you would have just knocked her out years ago, things would have worked themselves out by this point." But that kind of behavior is just not me. I can't. I do want to note here that I am not a wimp in that sense of the word. I'm trained in 3 different martial arts. I could have easily twisted her into a pretzel of broken bones at any time in my own defense if I chose to do it. That I had that kind of ability and that kind of power, yet restrained it and voluntarily refrained from using it. That's one reason why my daughter, who's now 14, views her daddy as a hero. But also there's the fear, there's the expectation that once you finally summon up the courage to let it be known that you're being beaten up by a woman, people are not going to believe you. I've experienced this in many forums. The most disappointing example, still hurtful to talk about, I reached out to Kathy's clergy people at Oak Hill Baptist Church in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. 2 pastors on the staff, Paul Wyden and David Briley. They received calls from me, sincerely and desperately soliciting their help. I was homeless at the time. Briley called me a deceiver and a manipulator. He said that I was controlling and abusive. When I played him a couple of clips of Kathy beating me up, he said they were fake. He said that he used to work as a police officer, and he used to see domestic violence, and I fit whatever profile that his criminology training and his psychology class had told him is a profile. And so that became the source of authority and not the scriptures, and not the evidence. Paul Wyden said that I had exhibited strange behavior because I had confronted a bully once when he threatened to shoot me. And of course, this was apart from any examination of the evidence involved. This is apart from any kind of rational conversation with me. This was apart from any consideration of the facts. Even though their own Bible, the scriptures for which I would die, demand that a person get both sides of a story before coming to a conclusion about it. But that Kathy was willing to do a lot of volunteer work. They were getting a lot of free labor out of her, and I guess there was a vested interest there in making sure that Kathy was viewed as right. The community seems to know that at this particular church, Oak Hill Baptist Church in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, whether it be North Minneapolis, whether it be Fridley, whether it be Columbia Heights, most people have caught on to the fact that the Bible ceased to be the authority in matters of faith and practice long before I ever arrived there. And I used to not believe it because I liked the place, but it became obvious to me after my eyes were opened by this event and a few others like it, and the manner in which they handled, or in this case failed to handle, my family's situation, that the community's observations were actually accurate after all, tragically. The leaders there, it must be noted for future going forward, that they have failed to act in accordance with Scripture once. This means that they're going to do it again in the future. You need to watch for it. Most of Columbia Heights, most of Northeast Minneapolis, most of Fridley is watchful and weary of this particular church. And my story demonstrates that, I guess, as it stands right now, they still need to continue to be discerning when considering it going forward. The fact is that very few people actually believe me, even professing Christians. I have evidence which documents my story, and I want to present this evidence in a systematic way before the public so that everyone can see it and hear it and know what the truth is. And I'm appealing to everybody that I can. Myself and my daughter Gabrielle are asking you to please pray very strongly as to whether or not God is laying it upon your heart to send some financial resources towards this particular effort. By earthly standards, by humanistic standards, this appeal, I would admit, sounds quite pathetic to some. And I gotta admit, it's not my normal way. It's not my normal personality. But when a man becomes a father, he becomes a person who sacrifices. This means that sometimes you sacrifice your own public image and reputation by casting aside any kind of pride which might get in the way of you seeking help. Any kind of pride must be swallowed, which gets in the way of you seeing the size of the problem at hand and admitting that without God functioning through the other people around you, you lack the capacity in and of yourself to have victory in and victory over it. When you need help of others, you got to admit it. And this is without regard to how humiliating it might be to ask. I've always strived to be a self-sufficient person. Self-reliance is a value that I've always tried to pass on to my children. But in this particular emergency instance, I'm in desperate need of help from others. If you're worried as to whether or not any financial assistance that you send to me is going to go into my personal budget to buy soda or shoes or whatever, I'm going to tell you the truth. Money never has to physically touch my hand. Before this album is over, I'm going to be happy to furnish you with the direct address of the attorney that has graciously agreed to represent me, and you can send it directly to her for my case and for my children's case. And maybe at some point down the road, I pray that I'm going to be in a position to be of assistance to you during your hour of need. I am a licensed clergy person, and I know that a religious leader's family falling apart on this radical of a level might look bad to some people. But I'm reminded of Prophet Hosea. His wife was a whore, and every bit the disaster that Catherine is, maybe even worse. But in the end, we still remember him as the prophet of God. We still read his work as the inspired Word of God. How many historical figures have we met in the Bible that have had imperfections, that have made mistakes, yet they've still been mightily used by God in order to achieve his overall doxological purposes in human history? Solomon had many wives and concubines. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Moses originally ran from his calling in disobedience to God. Paul killed Christians when he functioned as a Pharisee. Peter was a coward who denied Jesus Christ before the heathen simply because a little girl waved her finger at him. God uses crooked sticks in order to draw straight lines. He uses imperfect people in order to do perfect work. He uses rotten people in order to do acts of beauty in his created universe. I'm one of those imperfect people. I'm one of those crooked sticks. I'm one of those rotten people. It is an honor for me to know that I stand in a line of good company. So character assassinations, they're not something that I worry too much about. When a man breathes his last and he leaves this world, his works follow him. Church history is ultimately going to judge me by my works and not my critics. I'm not under 6 feet of dirt yet, though, so my story isn't over. In the end, God is ultimately going to glorify himself in my life, in my ministry, and in my work. In the same way that Satan and the demons triumphed at the cross over the death of the Messiah, there are several people in the community who, after this happened, wanted to see me go off into silence and obscurity as some discredited person never to be heard from again. Well, I wish to make those people aware of the fact that I'm unintimidated, and with the help of God, I shall rise again and come up out of this. And I'm going to continue on in the work that I was created and called to do. Matter of fact, these events and this wickedness are going to shape me and mold me into an even more usable tool in God's hands than I ever was before. The world, the flesh, the devil, and the apostate church will not intimidate me. They will not scare me off from what I'm supposed to do. Before the work outside of the home can continue, though, the work inside of the home needs to be taken care of properly. This means that I need to be furnished with the opportunity to do this. It starts very simply with making sure that I have as much access to and influence upon my children as humanly possible. They're not going to get the training that they need in the other house with Kathy. To be honest, once you have access to all the facts, many of you are hearing this for the first time. Some of you know Kathy in the community, and you're hearing this, and it's really devastating to you. But those of you who understand the truth, you have no choice but to conclude that you cannot see my kids having a shot at success in life through any other means than being with me, their daddy. The only way that a male has any kind of shot in Minnesota is with the right kind of representation in the courtroom, and it's probably going to take a lot of appeals, to be honest. The only way that I'm going to have the representation and the freedom for my lawyer to do what she needs to do and to get the experts alongside of her that can help is to have the cash necessary to finance all of it. Having been on unemployment for a year and a half once in this life and just rising up from a recent stretch of homelessness, myself and my family are once again on our own 2 feet by the grace of God. We have an apartment in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and we're trying. It seems like a new false charge is laid against either me or my daughter Gabrielle by Catherine or by one of her children every time we beat the one that just came before it. Very little breathing time in between false charges. And they come at a point in which the predator knows that we're at our weakest. I need to furnish a response to these charges when they come. I need to confront them head on. This is for the sake of my babies. This is for their future. Everything is on the line here. They're my everything and they're my all, second only to God. Now you've heard the first disc in this album. This is my daughter Gabrielle. This is her property. She's closing in on a deal with Amazon.com in which this is going to be made very public to a global marketplace. And I know that 2 discs is pretty long. I know that listening to it is time-consuming. I know that hearing footage of a woman beating people up and hurting children is not pretty. But I also know that if an emergency came up in your life or that of your family, you would take a moment out of your busy life. You'd drop what you're doing in order to try to gain an understanding of what's going on and what they're up against. Well, I'm telling you that such an emergency is here. It just happens that it's in my life. And while I might be a little on the biased side, I do have to declare that this specific emergency is definitely worthy of your time and consideration. So I'm asking you to please block aside the necessary chunk of time needed in order to hear both of these discs in their entirety in one sitting back to back. That first disc was just a taste. It was just a small piece of what daily life was like while living under the same roof with Catherine. If you haven't heard it for yourself, you have to. Don't go by speculation. Don't go by rumors, hearsay, slander, or gossip. Go by the evidence. Go by the footage. It's right there. While that first disc has the actual footage, this disc here is going to give you a context of what was going on in those clips. And so we're going to go through them in chronological order. I'm not going to recreate every single clip here, but if you listen to the first one, you'll remember, I remember her saying that literally. And if I'm quoting something here and it sounds too ridiculous to believe, listen to the first disc. Compare the two, and then you'll understand the size of the crisis, and I'm hoping that it moves you to want to get involved. I guess at this point we're just going to provide a brief explanation of what was covered in disc number 1 here. First of all, you have a very passionate and emotional introductory speech by Gabrielle herself. And Gabrielle, what she did was she took a recorder and she verbally just spoke her heart into the recorder. And then she took that, listened to it, wrote it down, made a few changes, and then did a second recording in which she read her changes. And that's what you have. It is beautiful. And sometimes she's powerful and hitting on point. You're like, yes, that's my little girl. And other times you have tears in your eyes like, wow. But it's definitely powerful. If you have not heard Gabrielle go on at the beginning, probably somewhere between 11 and 15 minutes, telling it like it was, not me, not under compulsion by me in any event, doing it all on her own, telling a brief version of her take as to how it was to live with Kathy. If you haven't heard it, you're missing out. Then you hear the clips of Kathy She's talking, of course, about Gabrielle, my daughter. Gabrielle, of course, not being her blood child. She says of Gabrielle, she's not better, she's worse. Worse than every other child. Where she got the complex that Gabrielle is better is basically this. Kathy was raised in foster care. And a foster parent, of course, they're being paid to deal with you. So she watched the foster parents have blood children and foster children, and there was a definite dichotomy or distinction in how they were treated. So the blood children got treated better, and the foster children got treated worse. So, for example, the foster children didn't have their own anything. They all had to share, and this was the foster toys or the foster whatever. So Kathy never got to own private property ever. But also, she developed a complex in which blood relationships were a pretty big deal to her. And so, anytime, for example, that I pointed out anything that her children did that needed correction, her response is, you only have a problem with them because they're not your blood children. Anytime I did something for Gabrielle, for example, if she had a pair of shoes that was falling apart, and I bought her some new shoes because the need was there, you only bought her shoes because she's your blood child. Kathy had this fixation on blood, and it came obviously from the white liberal communist stepmother or foster mother who really was cruel to her. But Kathy, like the dog who's loyal to the master that kicks it, Kathy is still in contact with this woman to this day and even calls her mother. You hear Kathy threatening of Gabrielle, one more and I'm going to punch her in the head. That's literally Kathy's words. You can hear it yourself on the other disc. And this is the woman who has sold herself to the court system and to Child Protective Services. My biggest problem with Brian is how he disciplines the children, is what she always says. And she's trying to sell them on, I don't believe in corporal punishment. Of course she does, but only for kids who are not her blood children, of course. Gabrielle, one more and I'm going to punch her in the head. This is coming from the woman who doesn't believe in physical punishment, supposedly. Kathy saying of Gabrielle, I'm not going to have Jamie be around her. So she's becoming a control freak and using my daughter Jamie from the infancy as sort of, I don't know what to call it, a tool to manipulate me. And she's already calling shots about what Jamie's going to do. She didn't ask me. She told me. And if I was a man doing this to a woman, I would be called controlling. But she's okay to do that, and that's horrible. Later on, you hear Kathy yelling at her, Gabrielle, saying, you're retarded, you're ugly, you're an effing B. Of course, her church people don't know that she talks like this. Then you hear Kathy saying of Gabrielle, that girl is evil. And you'll hear me respond to correct this verbal abuse and remind Kathy that Gabrielle's not evil, not to be blamed as the cause of Kathy's violent behavior. Kathy is responsible for her own violent behavior. Kathy's response is, yes, she is. And of course, when I say no, she's not, then Kathy says, then take her out. Now, what Kathy meant by this, not really clear because she's not the most articulate person on the planet. Was it a reference to killing her, taking her out, or to getting her out of the house before Kathy could explode on her? Who knew? But either way, it's a horrible way to treat and speak to a minor child. Later on, you hear Kathy accusing Gabrielle of being the cause of all division in the family, as well as a conspirator against our house, saying, quote, Gabrielle wants our marriage to be over, close quote. So Kathy, at this point, she's very paranoid, always thinks that myself, Gabrielle, or both of us are plotting against her. This is a mental sickness. Every time I try to tuck Gabrielle in at night, if I prayed with Gabrielle, if I read Gabrielle a story, Kathy would be standing there saying, what are you guys talking about? In Kathy's sight, Gabrielle is the cause of every problem that we ever encounter. Psychologically, this is called deflecting blame. If you have a problem with taking responsibility for what the person in the mirror did, simply make it someone else's fault. Now you have Kathy exclaiming that Gabrielle needs to learn how to, quote-unquote, respect other people when they're doing wrong. What this means is to listen to and obey a person even when they're being abusive, even when they're being threatening. Basically, no resistance was allowed to Kathy's ultimate dominance and control over every aspect of life under our roof. You have to respect people when they're doing wrong, she says. I guess at least she admitted she was doing wrong. She just wanted to be respected while doing it. She wanted the approval even when she was doing evil, you see. The next quote that you want to listen for is Kathy admitting that because of her escalating abuse at home, quote, Gabrielle's been getting into trouble in school because of this a lot of times. And also, quote, there's problems at home and they don't know why. And of the domestic problems, Kathy goes on to say that it is Gabrielle's fault. Of course, abusers often blame their victims so that they don't have to take ownership of and face their abusive behavior. This is pretty common. Just that no one would ever believe this unless you heard disc number 1. You hear Kathy calling Gabrielle evil, 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 evil. The woman who has attempted to deceive the community, the church, the courts, and the social services that she rejects corporal punishment for children is disappointed at how non-violent of a father I am, saying I should have, quote, gave her an old-fashioned whooping. She's upset that, quote, unquote, you cannot control your daughter, and constantly reminds us that, quote, I'm not her real mother. Listen to disc 1, you'll hear her say this in her own words. So while talking on the phone to her mother Alice about me, Kathy says, quote, I already told him that I'm not putting my hands on him no more. This is in reference to the fact that she beat me up almost daily. She told some of her family members about it once, after she was busted, of course, but in classic abuser fashion, she blamed me for the fact that she abused me. She told them that I was mean to her kids and that she was a heroine. She was heroically defending her kids against the evil Brian Shanley. And what were they, her listening audience, going to do? I mean, she's their relative. They believed her and they ate up her story. Later on in that disc, when discussing her daughter Casey Jo, Kathy says of her spankings of her, quote, no, I always leave a bruise on her. She's later discussing her anger and her rage problems with her mother Alice, and you listen to the clip, she says, I remember breaking my foot. I cracked my foot because I kicked the wall. This is a reference to a very specific incident in which she became so angry about something very small. Don't even remember what it was exactly, but anger filled her to the point that she kicked the wall with her bare foot in order to release that anger. Her foot was broken on that day, but she was so angry that she felt no pain for days afterward. To this day, as far as I know, she still hasn't gotten her foot fixed, but this kind of violent expression of anger by Kathy was an everyday thing. Later on, you'll hear her admit that my June 9th, 2007 false arrest for false charges of domestic assault, she says, quote, you went to jail for nothing because I put you there. And when I ask her, of course, in that same clip, whether or not I belong in a domestic violence class alongside violent offenders, whether or not I've ever done anything like that to her, her response is no. So she goes on to repeat that, quote, I'm the one who put you there. Thus, she admits to the crime of filing a false police report. You'll hear another clip in which she says, at least I know the truth that I'm the one who was beating you up. Thus, she admits to committing the crime of domestic assault on me. It's on tape. What's worth noting about this clip is that talk of her pulling a knife on me is as common as a normal couple discussing the evening news or who's going to win the championship or what's on television. Also, not having assaulted me in a few weeks was a celebratory milestone for her. Listen to that clip. Any stretch of nonviolence for her was a sign of progress, even if she had controlled her temper only for a short time. It was good because my various bruises had a chance to heal. You'll hear a clip in which I admit that I keep a log of dates, times, and occasions that she strikes me. She's paranoid and threatened by this and says, yeah, I know that you've been writing about me. I later learned that she used to go through my stuff while I was at work. She used to dig through my office where I would construct sermons and things of that nature. And this is how she knew that I was keeping the log. She was always worried that myself or Gabrielle were plotting to escape the house, and we're going to go to the police or go to the public with our side of the story, which would expose the kind of woman she was and her cruelty. Kathy was a cultural imperialist who tried to make our home conform to her prejudices that came from how she grew up. She wanted to make our home into the home of her childhood. There was no room for any other ideas than hers. Since she was raised by liberal white communists in a foster home, she didn't believe that any child had a right to own private property. Thus, she attempted to destroy Gabrielle's sentimental keepsakes that she got from her birth mother, Andrea, in protest. How dare Gabrielle try to own anything? She later changed her mind, and she allowed her daughters, Kaylin and Casey Jo, to own private property. But anytime Gabrielle got anything, I paid for it with my body through violence by her, fueled by her hatred and jealousy of my daughter Gabrielle. Kathy choking me and ripping my necklaces right off my neck was a frequent occurrence under our roof. She hated the picture of me and my daughter Gabrielle that I wore around my neck and was jealous of the fact that she was not on the necklace, despite the fact that I didn't even know her when the picture was taken and when the necklace was made. How could she be in a picture that was taken before I knew her? But you notice in the clip how casual she is about her stranglings of me, how normal they seemed, as she calmly explains about my broken necklaces, quote, "I always put it back together." So fixing the necklace that you break while strangling your husband makes up for the fact that you strangled him. Thus, she admits on tape to first-degree felony domestic assault on me, strangulation. It's a felony in Minnesota, but the bad news is that it happened in Fridley, Minnesota, which is in Anoka County. Because of the anti-male culture there, she can get away with it, and she knows it. Once she learned what Minnesota was really like, wow, did she play the system. You'll hear a clip in which I ask her about her behavior of habitual strangulation of me to the point that my clothing is ripped. She simply sighs and says calmly, "Well, like I said, you can always leave whenever you can. I don't chain up the doors. I don't keep you. I don't even chase you anymore." She knew that I couldn't actually leave because she was pregnant with my daughter Jamie, and I wanted to be a father to her. But I needed to hang on until the baby was born in Minnesota. The chase reference in that clip is a reference to the previous event in which she chased myself and Gabrielle down the hallway of our Fridley apartment building as we ran for our lives from our own home. This was in the spring of 2007. Kathy was 100% naked at the time, holding a huge butcher knife, running down a public hallway, and didn't even care. She was too blinded by rage and hate at that moment to be sane and sober enough to even care about her public nudity. So by saying, "I don't even chase you anymore," she meant that she was not going to try to prevent us from leaving again by chasing us nude in public with a horror movie-style butcher knife in her hand. She never chased us while being nude again, but she pulled knives like it was no big deal with frantic frequency and prevented us from leaving by force, threats, and intimidation. In the end, it literally took an intervention from Child Protective Services in Hennepin County, Minnesota, 2 years and many hospital trips later, before she would finally allow us to go, because she was in a position where she had no other choice. You'll hear a clip when reminiscing about a previous incident in which Kathy had picked up a huge wooden coat hanger and came after me in the attempt to beat me with it. She later minimized the event by saying, quote, "I didn't go after you. I wasn't going to hit you or anything. I just wanted to break it." Even though she was dishonest in her recollection, she still admits to expressing her anger with violence, even if not directed at me personally, which it actually was. The destruction of property is still unhealthily violent. If a man was doing that, he'd be viewed as a person that needed some help. But a woman doing it is quite okay in Minnesota. When referring to me and Gabrielle and our father-daughter bond, she said, quote, "That's one area I will never be able to win," close quote. Her desire was to disrupt our unity and turn us against each other. She had a divide and conquer kind of strategy meant to keep complete control and power over every aspect of life in our family. That she could not come between the father and daughter and get one of us to hate the other or one of us to turn on the other was a constant source of frustration to her. We praised God for the fact that we were viewed by the aggressor as unbreakable, even in the midst of this most escalated and hostile environment. Our father-daughter relationship was truly built on the solid rock. Another clip you'll hear, there was a time in which I told Kathy's daughter, Kaylin, no about something. Kaylin went to Kathy in an attempt to get my no answer overturned. Kathy confronted me in front of Kaylin for my sin of not leaping at the sound of her child's voice. She then disrespectfully overturned my answer right in front of Kaylin. I felt that this created a bad scenario for the future of parental authority in our home. My authority as Kaylin's father had just been undermined. I attempted to rationally discuss this with Kathy. Her response was not an explanation, nor was it an apology, nor was it an attempt to understand my concern and where I'm coming from. It was actually an unprovoked and out-of-left-field cheap shot at Gabrielle, who had nothing to do with the issue at hand whatsoever. She said, quote, "Gabrielle does that every day of her life," close quote. This irrational hatred of Gabrielle was a 24-hour-a-day horror, and we couldn't get out of it. Kathy was evil towards Gabrielle without restraint and without being provoked. She could take the most random, unrelated topic on the planet and somehow spit it into an assault on Gabrielle. Who could we go to? The church, the police, the public school system, the community, and social services didn't believe that this was actually happening. Nor did certain of our family or friends. They thought Kathy was cute and sweet. We were so trapped. You'll hear a clip in which Kathy interestingly admits about her behavior that, quote, I sit there and talk to myself half the time. Kathy says of me that though changes to her violent behavior were not happening, she, quote, repented to God about putting you in jail for no reason. So it's another admission to filing a false police report. This is a crime in Minnesota that any prosecutor who desires to do his or her job correctly has an obligation to the taxpayers to prosecute as aggressively as possible. But in Anoka County, Minnesota, United States, don't hold your breath. This quote also clears my name of any allegation of domestic assault or physical abuse. Since she had to give an affidavit under oath in order to put me in jail for no reason, this officially establishes Kathy as a liar and should cast doubt on anything she says going forward. The next quote you'll hear is basically after a separation in 2007. We moved back in together in the fall of 2007 in a duplex in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. I was telling her that things had not changed despite the changed environment. I pointed out that she was still hitting me, still calling the cops and lying about me, still pulling knives on me. When I'm listing these things, what she does not do is respond and call me a liar and try to correct me, but she responds with okay and but. In other words, she does not deny them, but she has an excuse. Of course, there's always an excuse. Abusers always have an excuse for their violent behavior. You'll hear a quote in which I remind her of the fact that she promised that this time around things would be different. I pointed out the history that she claimed that she'd been violent in times past only because she was pregnant, and that her hormones were out of control, causing her to be violent. Like I said, an abuser always has some kind of an excuse. I pointed out the fact that the baby had been born, her behavior had not changed, but rather escalated to a more violent level, and that now she was without any excuse other than her own heart. Now listen to the clip, and her responses are, quote, then get the hell out, and, quote, whoopee, in a sarcastic tone. There's another clip in which I point out the fact that she's violent and doesn't care. Her response is, I don't. In other words, she didn't see her abusive behavior as a problem in need of correction at all. She doesn't care about it in the least. This is what I had to live in, and this is what my daughter had to live in. You'll hear a clip in which I recall an incident in which she choked me in early 2008, and as I was trying to breathe, she yells at me, don't you see how much I love you? Her response is not a correction of the story, not a correction of my telling of the event, nor it's an apology, but rather it's a sarcastic, wow, whoopee, then get the F out. All attempts to get her to see the error of this kind of behavior always ended in failure, despite my long suffering and despite my best efforts to help her. You'll hear a quote in which Kathy, violently jealous of and with hatred for my daughter Gabrielle, snapped and snarled, quote, I'm the child out of this effing house, and she's your wife. This child insecurity and paranoia on the part of Kathy made everyday life a real struggle. I tried my best to see where she was coming from or what her hatred was actually based on. But despite my best efforts, I was never able to. There's a quote in which I asked Kathy whether or not I belong in a domestic violence class. Her response is a clear and non-hesitant no. Another reference from Kathy to Gabrielle is, quote-unquote, yours. In other words, she's not mine, she's yours. And when I ask her for clarification, she says that, quote, Gabrielle is your responsibility. Now, Kathy handed out the word abusive like water at a marathon. Every other word out of her mouth was an attempt to pin the label of abusive on me. And when I went to the bathroom and shut the door behind me so that I could use the toilet in private, God forbid, she called me, quote, abusive. She was in the middle of following me around the house, hitting me, yelling at me, and it was in the middle of the night. And I needed to use the bathroom in the midst of it all. Because I was in need of a physical and a mental break from her onslaught, she declared me, quote, abusive. Now, I called her on this misuse of that term. She'd obviously been falsely trained by somebody in her past to use it so freely, so wildly, and so loosely that the word had become meaningless to her. I reminded her of just how serious the charge was to me and to most of the sane world, and how she had no basis in reality for attempting to assign it to me. She admitted that she was busted and said, quote, Brian, I didn't mean it. It just popped out of my mouth. I didn't even mean to say it. Listen to the disc. Later on in that very same discussion, she reiterated, I told you it slipped out of my mouth. I didn't mean to say it. The fact that the abuser could call her victim the abuser is the behavior and speech of a classic abuser, blaming the object of their abuse and even training and tricking their mind to see reality in reverse of how it actually happened. Kathy was trying to suppress her behavior by convincing her own self that she was the victim and that those she was victimizing were actually the perpetrators. It must be noted here that the very next day, which was Monday, October the 8th, 2007, Catherine secretly went to the Columbia Heights, Minnesota Police Department while I was at work and reported that I had abused her. If you look at the police report, she really hammed it up by crying and shaking, which, by the way, she can do on demand for no reason at all. As though it had just happened, as though I had harmed her all the way from my desk downtown Minneapolis because I was at work at the time. She accused me of pushing her down, even though I was at work with 400 other co-workers who could have verified it. So could my work computer at the time that I supposedly did this. Upon being asked, she refused to have me arrested, but she said she just wanted this to be quote-unquote documented. If they had gone to our house to arrest me, they would have discovered that I wasn't home and that I'd done nothing to her and that she was lying to them. This is why she refused to move forward and press charges on me, the so-called abuser. She had something to hide. The report is also revealing of what her end game was and how she was already putting it into work way back then, which is to take my children and move them to Illinois. Her words are there in the report. It's Police Report 09801 for domestic and 09912 for social services referrals. The police and various human services agencies, child protection seeming to be her favorite, had become the attack dog that she was going to sick on anybody who disagreed with her. These agencies were the way that she could silence dissenting voices, the way she could squash all questions. She was an authoritarian, dictatorial ruler of the house. Anyone who knew her knew so. Anyone who had another opinion or idea other than her own was going to go to jail or a behavior modification or indoctrination class. As the quote from the album demonstrates, at this point she committed the crime of filing a false police report yet again, the second time in the same county within 4 months of each other. She still engages in this manner of abuse of the system to this very day, enabled by the current secular psychology, feminist, anti-male culture in Anoka County. Nobody has corrected this behavior of hers as of yet. Her lies are welcomed with open arms and even acted upon by Anoka County, quote-unquote, Child Protective Services. So it will always be continually going on in one capacity or another until she either achieves her end goal of destroying me and getting my kids away from me, or is finally compelled to stop this behavior and act like a normal person. Now, the next clip, I was about to use the phone. Kathy stood in between the phone and myself and demanded that I hit her because that was the only way that she was going to allow me to use the phone. She had yelled multiple times, quote, "I want you to hit me. I want you to hit me." She was always paranoid that I was going to call the cops on her or call someone to come and get me and the kids out of there. She was always loud deliberately so as to draw the neighbors' attention to our duplex or our apartment so that I could be arrested. She knew that she would be believed and that I would not be believed by anyone who arrived. It was a great rush and a great power trip to her. It needs to be pointed out at this point that if she honestly felt that I might call the police by violently preventing my use of the phone, she committed the crime in Minnesota of interfering with a 911 call. But this happened in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. This is Anoka County, and she's a female. Her victim was a male. In Marxism, the female is the oppressed, and so it's simply the oppressed rising up against the oppressor. Therefore, I have little to no hope that she'll ever be made to pay for any of this stuff. But it happened every day. So I answered her controlling and crazy behavior by asking her the direct question of whether or not I had ever physically hurt her in history, and her response was, "Not yet, but there's going to be a day." Listen to the first disc in this album. She later goes on in that very conversation to say, "It will happen." She goes on to attempt to cast herself in the role of a victim by saying, "Brian, you already hate everything about me." She then later admits that she had said, "Why don't you hit me like you want to get the phone?" And again she says, "You will." And still again, "You'll find a way of doing it one day." To a lot of the people who knew us on a deep level at home, it was as though in their minds she literally wanted me to strike her for the advantage that such an event would give to her in what was beginning to look like an inevitable and unavoidable future custody battle. I thank God that I had a patience and a self-control not of this world, and never once took her bait. The next clip that you'll hear that's of significance in the first album is when I confronted her about the fact that she had just gotten done physically putting her hands on me by getting in my face and pushing me around. She didn't deny it. She didn't say, I didn't do that. But she made, of course, yet another excuse. Brian, what I did, I had grounds. Those are her exact words. Listen to the album. Thus, she admits to assault. Pushing is a lesser degree of assault than punching, but it is assault nonetheless. This happened frequently, almost daily. To this day, she's never even had one consequence, and I have little confidence that she ever will. What if a man was constantly pushing his wife around all the time? He'd be in jail. He'd be in some indoctrination class pretty quickly. The next set of clips are pretty horrible because when attempting to manipulate me emotionally and psychologically, she used our then newborn daughter Jamie as the object, as the weapon. She threatens at this point to abandon her and to leave to Illinois without her, thus making me a single father of 2 motherless girls. I asked her how she could abandon her own daughter. Her exact words, listen to it, quote, because of you. I asked her again whether or not I went to jail for something that I did. Again, her response is no. My name couldn't be any clearer at this point. Her behavior as a liar, even to police, could not be any more established at this point, and the CD is just getting going. Later on in a clip, I confront her for the fact that she once again pinned the label abusive on me for no reason. Instead of pin the tail on the donkey, she had pinned the label abusive on the man. And of course, when I pointed out that she was abusing the word abuse, she responds, and I said sorry, but she's yelling like I had just done something horrible by defending my name. The most blind person alive can see a pattern here at this point. She's willing to deliberately distort the facts in order to make me sound like the bad guy when I'm not. Most people that know her intimately will admit that she's a routine and a borderline pathological liar. Difficult to get her to tell the truth about too much of anything. There's a clip at about this point in which I asked her to serve on probation in connection with a plea agreement that I agreed to for her false charges of domestic assault. She said, no, I don't. She knows that I'm missing to recognize the fact that she's a liar. And here she admits it. Will she ever pay for it now? She'll get rewarded for it in Minnesota. One of her frequent suicide threats, an emotionally abusive manipulation tactic which was meant to force me to submit to her demands in order to prevent her from engaging in self-injurious behavior, is captured on tape here. She says, quote, one of these days I should hang myself. I ask her what's wrong with her. Her response, as all abusers do, is to explain you in order to blame their victim for their abusive behavior. This is just one of many suicide attempts. She used to, suicide threats rather. She used to threaten suicide all the time because she knew it would make me cry and that I would do whatever she said in order to prevent her from hurting herself. I had to work. Sometimes I'd call in sick from work just to make sure she didn't hurt herself. There's another clip here in which I'm pleading with her not to abandon her newborn baby daughter, Jamie. And she said, quote, she's better off without me. Now today I'd be in full agreement with that statement. Jamie would be better off without Kathy. But back then, Kathy knew that I did not want my baby girl Jamie to be motherless. And she used my love for baby Jamie in order to gain the upper hand on me. And she did this as a way of everyday life. It was a horrible state of being to live in. And I was always in something like this. There's a clip at this point in which I asked her whether or not she had the right to lie. And she said yes. Her feeling that she has the right to lie in order to get what she wants has characterized the entire history of her dealings with me. If anybody trusts a word that she says, once this album becomes public and they're made aware of the truth, then they deserve whatever she does to them, and she burns everybody who comes along with her. At this point, the next clip, basically what's going on there is I ask her again, and it was a frequent topic of discussion, about me being in an anger management class alongside people who had beaten their wives. She acted like it was my fault by saying that, quote, you were there because you chose to take the plea. I reminded her of the reason why I chose not to go to trial, that it was for her benefit. Since she was the accuser, my trial would have consisted of attacking her credibility and demonstrating that she had lied. She wanted to take the stand, and she wanted to tell the truth. This would have involved admitting that she had lied in her initial statement to the police. Anoka County was talking of arresting her, at least this is what my lawyer said at the time, for the crime of filing a false police report and prosecuting her if she dared to recant her initial lies. She was pregnant, and my baby daughter would have been thus born in Anoka County Jail. So in classic victim fashion, I dove on the grenade, and I did sacrificially plead guilty to disorderly conduct in order to preserve her. It was an act of the kind of sacrificial love of a husband who had not yet given up on his bride without regard to how self-destructive she was. Her response to my reminding her of this historical fact is, quote, "I don't give an F." And you can insert your own four-letter word there, but you know what she says. Listen to the album. When threatening to take Jamie and run to another state, she knows that separation from my baby girl is going to hurt me, and it's really the chief card that she's always played. She says, quote, "Watch what happens tomorrow, B," and as a curse word there. This is her way of telling me that she's planning to take off with my daughter forever while I'm at work. She wants to bring me to my knees, get me to beg, cry, and plead for my daughter. History has shown that I will, and she knows it. She's a powerful control freak in action. If a man manipulated a woman this way, he would be in big trouble. But for her, it's okay. And I don't understand why or where people get off having these kind of bigotries. At this point, when I mention that I have just as much of a right in terms of equality to be Jamie's parent as she does, her response is, quote, "No, you don't. You're a male. You're not good enough. Only mothers are." This anti-male bigotry is the result of growing up in a white liberal communist foster home in which all males are viewed as oppressors and all females are viewed as oppressed. Females are to rise up, overthrow the men who they view as quote-unquote in power, and take the leadership role in the family structure. It is a sexism that views females as ontologically superior and males as ontologically inferior. The radical feminism of the 1960s is hostile to the structure of a family as God has defined it, and her indoctrination by it ripped our family to shreds, just as it was designed to do. The anti-male bigotry of Anoka County, Minnesota fits Kathy's mentality like a hand in glove. There's always a receptive audience for her lies, and she's never questioned because of the fact that she's a woman. There's another clip here in which Kathy refers to the act of childbirth as, quote, "I'm the one who did the whole 9 yards," and on that basis stated, quote, "That's why women have custody of their babies. Thus, it's okay to discriminate against men on the basis of the fact that they're not women, on the basis of the fact that they cannot give birth. If she did this to any other group of people on the earth, she would be viewed as a bigot, but it's okay to do to men." You see what's going on here. The next clip, when it comes to the act of the man impregnating the woman, she says, quote, "Who cares? Eventually, if you didn't do it, someone else would have." And then she goes on to say, quote, "Before I ever met you, I got pregnant every year. I would have ended up pregnant again," close quote. This is a minimized view of fathers as being transient sperm donors who make a baby and then take off. That I have the desire to stick in my kids' lives and be a father to them for the long haul is so foreign and so inconvenient to her life goals. She doesn't want to co-parent. She wants to call the shots, and she wants to collect the child support. She wants me to shut up and do as I'm told and not aspire to any more rights as a father than she's willing to grant me. This is a destructive mentality for a mother to have and a dangerous thing for her to pass on to a daughter. She views her absolute right to take the kids away and make a geographical gap between them and their father is, quote,
"I am not abusive. I get frustrated with you, and that's how it happens. It does not mean I'm abusive. It just means I have some areas I gotta work on."
You don't think hitting is abuse, huh?
Brian, everybody hits their spouse once in a while when it happens to them. They get frustrated. You can tell me I'm abusive. You can call me off the tip and God, I don't give a fuck. I can run you over. Help me out more.
Why would you threaten to run me